Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to expand the availability of our Napoleonic games. I wanted to have a look at how we can fight games that are not historically accurate per se, probably not historically accurate at all, but we can fight battles against nations who didn't actually square off on a Napoleonic battlefield. Now, the Napoleonic Wars were largely made up of a series of what were called wars of coalitions. And that means that, as the name suggests, it was usually a group of countries that got together to fight the French. And that means that if you have a French army, almost any army in the game, or the period, you can historically justify fighting them on the tabletop. So even armies that were at one point their allies, such as Spain, they fought against, and armies that were once their most bitter enemies, say the Austrians and the Prussians, they actually fought alongside them, sort of, during the 1812 campaign. Add to this, you've also got expeditionary forces, particularly the British and the French in Egypt, or the French and the British, if you want to do it chronologically, I suppose. Then you can have a lot of these different countries that don't look like they have the availability to fight each other in the first place, but you dig a little bit deeper and they do. But there are also those nations out there that didn't face each other on the battlefield, and it's those guys that I want to focus on today. The reason why I think this is worth talking about, I guess we probably get this in right at the beginning, is I've seen a couple of posts in the, probably since about Christmas, I've seen 4 or 5 posts on social media where it is people saying, I've just joined a club or I've just moved to an area, I'm getting interested in Napoleonics. In my club, there are 2 people with French armies, 1 person with a Russian army, 1 person with a British army. I'm just making stuff up. 1 person with a British army. So which army should I collect? And, people have said, well, if you collect French, then you can have any opponent you want. That's fair enough. Some people have said, well, it doesn't look like anyone's got a Prussian army or an Austrian army in that group, so maybe look at one of those. Or maybe you can even go for a minor power, then you can switch sides to something like Bavaria. These are all fully reasonable answers. However, and it's something that I've come to more recently, I think one of the problems with that is I think that the best answer to that question of what army should I collect is, what army do you want to collect? What's the one that excites you the most? What's the one that's got you into the Napoleonic period? Because you're going to have to buy the army, and you're going to have to spend a long time painting the army as well, or at least pay someone a lot of money to paint it for you. So it should be something that you're passionate about. The second reason is what's known as, in Warhammer circles, I don't know if it's, I guess it's a more historical gaming term as well, but it's what we call a pickup game. So that is where you go to your club or, your local store or whatever, and you've got in your carry case a 500 point or 600 point or 1,000 point army, and you're going to have a game against someone else with an equally sized army. This can either be done on spec, which is very much the case with Warhammer 40,000, or Fantasy to a lesser extent, or it could be that you've pre-arranged something. Now, the fact of it being done on spec is quite unlikely, I have to say. I don't think I've ever been or heard of going to a club and just rocking up and be like, oh, you've brought a 500-point Napoleonic army as well. What a coincidence. Let's have a game. I've never seen that happen. It may have done, though. It may have done. But I've not seen it. I hope it does one day. I hope that's the norm. But as it stands, that's currently not generally how it works. But it's also a mindset which allows that to happen. It allows events to happen. It allows things that may be conventions. You could have Absolute Emperor for an evening, or Black Powder for a day, or whatever. So these are things that I'm actually quite interested in seeing going forward. And stay tuned in a few weeks for a little bit more details on that. But the idea of the pickup game is that you can sit down with an army and you can get that game out. Does it have to be historically accurate? Not really. Can your 1800 era revolutionary French beat a 1815 Prussian army? Well, probably not. But that's where the points values and the upgrades for the units and all that kind of good stuff comes in. But without this, what's the word I'm thinking of? Without this culture, I guess, of having pickup games, which you don't have in Napoleonics for understandable reasons, then there's a tendency for people to get a bit sniffy about matchups which wouldn't be historically feasible or historically accurate. Now, next week, here's a bit of a spoiler for next week's video. We are going to be seeing a battle of one of these. It's going to be a points match, 600 points each, and it's going to be Russians versus British. So there you go, and also from 2 different books as well. What I wanted to do, obviously, because they're not in the same book, so I wanted to see how those 2 books fought against each other. It's something I've done for quite a while in other periods as well. Quite some time ago, I picked up a Vietnam American army. I've also got a Vietnamese Vietnam army as well, but that doesn't really interest me anywhere near as much as the Americans. A friend of mine has a Fate of a Nation army. It's a Jordanian army, actually, that he's got. And we've had some good games of Fate of a Nam, where my Americans have faced off against his Jordanians. Just let's put it this way: he has a lot of Centurions. If I take Sheridans, I win. If I play nice and don't take Sheridans, then I get absolutely curb stomped. So anyway, that's a different matter. So by being open to the concept of pickup games, we are widening our potential for opponents. As I say, it's unlikely to happen. I mean, again, if it's unlikely for 2 players to turn up on spec with Napoleonic armies in the first place, just imagine if one of them's got an army that didn't fight the other one historically, so they've said, no, we're not going to play. I mean, that's like generally laughable to me. So that's why I think that culture is worth fostering. The other thing as well is that it allows you to explore different aspects of your army. So if your army is particularly good at something, for argument's sake, they're very good on attack, like the French are, then you're going to be looking at your opponents all the time. Actually, the French are probably a very poor example, because the French can fight pretty much everyone. Let's say you're very good defensively, like, say, the Russians. Now, the Russians have poor shooting. They get -1 to their hit rolls from shooting, but they all get tough fighter. They get +1 to their orders to charge. So they're obviously a very close combat orientated army there. So the French, the games against the French become, can the Russians hold out using their extra stamina, using their tough fighter? Can they hold out against the aggressiveness and numbers of the French? Well, those are interesting battles, don't get me wrong. But once you've done that 5, 6, 7, 8, a dozen times, you might want to start looking at maybe doing something different. So one of the things might be, if the Russians are a defensive counter-punch army, how do they stack up against another defensive counter-punch army, like, say, the British? And that was the inspiration behind us having our game that, as I say, will be next week's video. So not only is there the practical aspect of widening the number of armies that you can fight, but there's also the rather more, shall we say, intellectual challenge of using your army strengths against an army that may have similar strengths and may actually be better than your army in certain areas. Sort of muscles that you wouldn't exercise against, say, a French army, you may have to start exercising against a British army or a Spanish army, something like that. Well, I don't know if you have too much exercise against the Spanish. I mentioned earlier on that this could be done with points, particularly if you're looking at pickup games, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You could still use historical formations and drop them into a battle against each other. So, for instance, I've got the British 3rd Division, so I might say, well, it's going to be the 3rd Division versus a Russian division or an Austrian division. Now, that's not necessarily the best, particularly if you're using the Prussians, because the Prussians had a very weird way of putting their formations together. If you've watched my videos on the Prussians, then you'll know that was quite unique and the reasons for doing that. And also, Russian brigades and divisions tend to be very small, but you can work it out as well. If you say, well, the British 3rd Division's got 8 units of infantry, well, we'll cobble together formations that are 8 units of Russian infantry, or Austrians, or, whatever you're going to go for. I would recommend more that you do it with the points values that are given in the back of the supplements, but, a lot of people don't like doing that. They think it's a bit too tournamenty, so they prefer to go with just ORBATs, orders of battle, and the formations that really existed. And either way, whichever way suits you is fine, I think. That one's very much down to a personal preference and just what you have available to you at the time. Additionally, because you're not necessarily setting this in any particular campaign, because it's kind of made up anyway, it does mean that you can either have the units in different uniforms or different units that didn't exist at a time when maybe these 2 belligerents did fight each other. So, for an example, if you're looking at the Austrian army, And you can say, right, I want to fight the Russians with my Austrians. Well, they fought each other in 1812. This is the breakdown of the units that were there. Well, the Guard weren't there. The Guard never went into the field. Or the Prussians would be another great example. The Prussian Guard, they did go into the field. So you can say, well, they didn't take part in the invasion of Russia. But, if you're doing an army that you also want to use to fight the British as well, as an example, then why not put the Prussian Garde Corps in there? Because you're doing it for your own enjoyment anyway. So go large on that one. So by being period agnostic, it means that you can put in the cool things that maybe you wouldn't be able to otherwise. And let's face it, who doesn't want to put in the cool stuff in their army? Particularly for you Prussian players who, having painted your 8,000th guy in sack for the Landwehr, at least you get to paint some garde corps or something that's a little bit more fun than that. So having looked at the reasons why I think ahistorical matchups are not a bad thing, but are also a positively good thing, then I think we can look at which non-historical matchups would be the most interesting, or do I think would be the most interesting, I should say. And you let me know in the comments which ones I've missed and that you think would be quite interesting. Now, one of them that I think, and we'll see next week, is Russia versus Britain. Britain's got really good musketry, good cavalry for what it's got, but not much. Whereas the Russians have got plenty of good stuff, and they've got poor musketry, but very good artillery, which is something that the British have moderate artillery. Not as good as it's not as good as the Russians. It's just they don't have as much of it at the same caliber that the Russians do. Similarly, I think the British versus the Austrians would be quite an interesting one, because you've got the excellent musketry of the British, but you've got the big defensive blocks of the Austrians, and again, just their sheer numbers. Those large battalions are going to be very tough for the Brits to take down. Even with their steady line special rule, they can countercharge, and they can look super Saiyan against the Austrians, but those large battalions of Austrian infantry are still going to be rolling more dice. One that could be quite a comedic, for want of a better term, matchup would be the Spanish versus the Prussians, particularly the 1806 Prussians I'm thinking of here. So you've got two absolutely fantabulous-looking armies, both locked in the past, trying to find their way around the new tactics and the new method of doing things. I actually think those armies would be surprisingly well balanced. And speaking of the Prussians, I think the ultimate one would have to be a precursor to all the 20th century shenanigans that we had. And Prussia versus the British would, I think, be the ultimate what-if battle. I think that would be really interesting to see. You've got particularly in 1815, you've got a hyper-aggressive, very well-trained, very well-equipped Prussian army versus a British army that's by now a little bit battle-worn, a little bit fatigued. It's still got the skills that enable them to win the Peninsular War and eventually prevail at Waterloo with obviously the Prussian help. But you've got absolutely masses of cavalry for the Prussians. You've got masses of moderate to low-quality infantry to back up the elite-ish Prussian infantry. I think that would be a really, really interesting fight. The Prussians in 1815, for my money, are possibly the best army in the world. That's a big controversial statement for you, but I'm sticking with it. And the British, I think they've supplanted the British as the best army in the world. So I think the French ceased that in the snows of Russia. So I think you've got an interesting balance, just like the 1806 Prussians will be balanced with the Spanish at the bottom end of the power scale. I think at the top end, the Prussians and the British, I think that'd be a really, really interesting fight. And it's worth remembering that until Napoleon came back from his first stint away, shall we say, that discussions at the Congress of Vienna were getting very, very heated between a Western European power bloc, particularly Britain, France, and an Eastern European power bloc, particularly, I think it was Russia and Austria. It might have been Russia and Prussia. I think it was Russia and Austria that were looking to take back control over Europe for their own ends as well. So if we didn't have the awesome Waterloo campaign, the 100 days, maybe we would have had some of these fights that we now have to call ahistorical. Maybe they actually would have happened. And that's it really. I just wanted this to be a bit of a discussion video. I think that the final thing I want to mention before I go is this seems to be a problem almost unique to the Napoleonic era. of this not sniffiness. I think that's probably a little bit too strong, but a reluctance, shall we say, to have these ahistorical battles. I've said before, you look at anything medieval or earlier, talking maybe 1485, the Battle of Bosworth, anything before that, and people will quite happily fight against each other with using any old army from across periods. I mean, I saw a game of Art de la Guerre the other week at my local club, and we had an Indian army, so the Indians that fought Alexander the Great, and they were fighting some Burgundian mercenaries from the 15th century, or maybe 14th century, it might have been. So yeah, I mean, and that's perfectly acceptable. But if you'd said to those two guys who were very serious players, yeah, do you want to fight my Napoleonic British against your Napoleonic Russians? They probably would have thought that was a bit odd. Also, if you look at later periods, say Flames of War, you'll quite happily see two German players fighting each other off at Flames of War, or two Allied players, Brits versus Americans, or whatever. So, I mean, again, you've got hypothetical conflicts when you go into modern. So I play quite a lot of 1980s Cold War games as well. So, obviously there wasn't a war between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, luckily. But, I mean, again, that's an acceptable period to play. It seems to be only that it's kind of the horse and musket era that you would get these problems where people just say, and even with the 7 Years' War, there's a much more, I don't know if you've seen the video I did on Imaginations, but that seems to be a lot more acceptable then as well. So basically what I want to say is that pickup games, I think, are going to be a really crucial way of playing games in the future, a really interesting way of playing them as well. So I think that by expanding the armies that we can have facing each other, then I think we can have a much better time, and we can have more games, and we can have more enjoyable games as we explore the different aspects of our armies. Now, if you don't believe me, that's fine. I'd like to hear your comments down below. Next week's battle report is going to be one of these ahistorical battles. It's going to be the British versus the Russians. And then following that week, so I'm actually getting ahead of myself. I should stop doing this because it never actually comes to pass. But hopefully the following week, I will be releasing something that I hope is going to lead to some good things for the Napoleonic community in 2023. But that's it for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And who do you think would be the most interesting fictional clash? Even if it was between armies that did fight each other, was there maybe two commanders that you think it would have been interesting to see them face off against each other? But that's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. Bit of a rambly one, this one. Bit of a my thoughts one. So I really genuinely am interested to hear what you guys think. And I hope to see you next time for some battle report action. See you then.